Yes. So when it comes to mindset, there's a couple components that I'd love to share. Is one, don't ever stop clarifying your vision. Don't ever stop clarifying your purpose. Don't ever stop clarifying your mission. Sometimes we think we've nailed it, but the truth is it's ever evolving as you are.
Welcome to A Sister's Love, the podcast that helps women who are healing by having those deep conversations, giving practical advice and words of encouragement. Come on, let's talk about it.
Hello, my beautiful sisters. Welcome to another episode of A Sister's Love podcast. On today's episode of A Sister's Love podcast, we have a beautiful guest. Her name is Carly, and she is a mindset coach. She is here to help us shift our mindset around trauma and some things that we could do to help us work on that trauma. But before we get started, I would love to introduce myself. I am Rose Jones, your host here at A Sister's Love podcast. And I am just one woman or one story on a mission to help women heal. So if you are a woman who is looking for a safe place to heal or looking for resources to help you in your healing or your self-love journey, then you are in the right place. I would love for you to hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications so that you never miss another episode of A Sister's Love podcast. On today's episode, we have a beautiful guest. Her name is Carly, and she's going to introduce herself and give us a little background about what she do and why she's here on the podcast today and how she's going to help you shift your mindset.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Rose. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And my name is Carly Pepin. I'm a human behavior specialist, and I work with individuals to help them overcome limiting beliefs, shift their perceptions so that they can move from being stuck to feeling back on track and back on purpose. And the reason why I got into this is because I actually had a similar challenge myself. So I remember there was a time, it was like 12 years ago now. I had to think about that for a second. So it was 12 years ago where I was living in Los Angeles. I had the house, I had the car, I had the job, all that fun, exciting stuff. And I just remember feeling very unfulfilled, very purposeless. And so I decided to move across the world to Australia because I thought that that would solve all my problems. And once I got there, I was all by myself and realized that everything was actually coming from within. So that was the first time that it really humbled me to realize like the work was going to be inside and I couldn't keep trying to change my outside circumstances. So I started studying with human behavior specialists, understanding more about purpose, why we do the things we do, how to overcome things. And then as my journey started to move forward, I also wanted to teach this to other people as well. So that's also how I became human behavior specialist, coach, and consultant. And I really look forward to assisting people today and all around the world. It's definitely part of my mission to just help people realize they're not the stories that they thought they once were, that these stories can be overcome, and that every person has a unique purpose on this planet, and it's our destiny to fulfill it. And I would love to help people do that.
That is awesome. So most of our listeners is people that experience a lot of trauma. And I want to know if there's anything specific that we can say or do to help us, like what our thought process with trauma, because trauma is like a whole different level of a regular thought process. You know, people that have been through trauma, their story, their mindset is like really like buried into that trauma. So is it a way to help them get out of it or help them start to reprogram or shift those beliefs?
Yes. And when we think about trauma, it's just thinking about it in the same sense as how we would shift our mindset regularly, but in a more extreme situation, right? So I myself have been through traumatic experience from the past, right? Sexual experience when I was a kid, and I'm okay now. I'm okay now. But I know that with trauma, there's this challenge that comes with it, where whatever you associate with that past perceived trauma is going to actually get triggered and re-triggered based on your current associations with it today. So for example, I'll give you mine as an example because I feel like that one's really helpful. So the individual that I had the traumatic experience with, that individual, whenever I met a male authority that I perceived even looked like him or had something remotely close, I would go into a traumatic state. And when I say traumatic state, one of my mentors, whenever I tried to talk to him, I would start shaking and trembling and I'd want to tear up. And I actually had no idea what was happening. I had blocked it out for a really long time. That was my coping mechanism. So I'd blocked it out. So I had no idea what was happening. And then there was another one, mentor of mine, a yoga teacher. And whenever I would try to do a private class with him, I would burst into tears in between postures. I just looked at him and I was like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I don't even know. So it wasn't until I actually could go back and shift my mindset and my perceptions around that trauma that now I can connect with those people. All those little reminders don't instill or trigger like the past perceived trauma again. Because remember, if the trauma is still perceived as a trauma, and I keep saying perceived because we want to shift our perceptions, right? So if it's still perceived as a traumatic experience instead of just an event, anytime anything comes around, it could be a smell, it could be something you see, something you hear that reminds you of it, it'll trigger you back into fight or flight mode. And your body and your physiology and your mind does this because it's trying to protect you. So the things that we often get most frustrated with is actually like your mind and your body trying to protect you. So when we shift it from a past perception of trauma and we shift our perception so that we can start to look at it as an event that occurred in our life, those things won't have control over you anymore. You could experience the same things you did before that had the trigger, and it'll be completely gone.
That's cool. So it's like pretty much changing your perspective around what happened. So like, yes, this happened to me, but I'm now safe. So now I can experience similar things, people that kind of remind me of it, but this person is not the person that hurt me. So I don't have to stop myself from fully experiencing this experience because of what did happen to me. Is I'm explaining that right? I think I said that right.
Yeah, we're getting there, getting more detail. We'll do some more detail too. Yeah. And this is cool too, because you'll hear a lot of individuals and, big speakers out there who've gone through major trauma, and they'll say, I would not be where I am today if I did not go through this. Now, there's a level of gratitude that they have for the experience, because if I ask them, do you want to go back and change it? And they're like, well, I wouldn't want to go through it again. But at the same time, like, I don't want to change it, right? So we're going to go another step. We're going to go one more step, right? Because to get rid of trauma. Because part of it is having gratitude, and you could see how it shaped and formed and gave you the life you have today. And that'll give you a great level of appreciation. But the other trick to actually getting rid of trauma and transforming it completely is to go back into those moments that you experienced it and make sure you feel the same gratitude in the moment as you do later on. Because right now I might be able to say, hey, I'm really grateful I had that sexual experience. But if I go back into that moment and I think about it, and if I still have a trauma reaction, it's not done yet. I haven't actually seen how it served me back then. And that's one of the most important things as well, is to make sure that you're shifting your perception, not just present day, long term, and all these tertiary effects, but what happened literally during that time that you experienced it. For me, it was a kid. So I had to go back all the way to when I was a kid and really get present with that child and shift the perceptions like I'm shifting the perceptions I would in childhood. And now I can go back, think about it. I could talk about it, and other people will get uncomfortable, but I won't anymore, because I can talk about it just like it's an event, right? So we want to do such the deep work to make it that it's just an event, that you have gratitude for what you've experienced. And then anytime any of those associations come, they have no control over you. You won't even notice. You'll stop noticing, which is amazing.
I think the biggest problem that people might come up with this is that people might have a hard time associating gratitude with it because, my computer light. Okay. People might have a hard time connecting gratitude with it because some people may not have started a healing process, so they don't see how it has positively changed or shifted their life. Like me, I started my healing process, so the things that I've been through, I understand. Cause if I never been through it, I wouldn't be standing here on this podcast right now. I wouldn't have a story to tell. I wouldn't have a platform to feel like a platform was needed for people to tell their story. You know what I'm saying? So I understand my gratitude because I started a process of healing and started to move forward through it. A lot of people may not have did that. So is it a way for them to actually start that process so they can get that gratitude process started, so they can feel grateful and they can start moving forward in that process of changing that traumatic event into just an experience?
Yeah. And first off, I just want to share with everyone, when I talk about this stuff, I know I'm simplifying it. I do know I'm simplifying it, but it's not easy. I wouldn't have a job if it was easy. And it's also, my coaches wouldn't have jobs if it was easy. Like, it is what it is. So don't beat yourself up if you're listening and you're like, how do I do this? How does she does it? Right. So it takes time and it takes practice, right? It takes time, practice. And, there's a lot of bits and pieces that you can dive into to get to the specifics. We're going to kind of generally summarize here. So I just want to preface that for people so they're not beating themselves up at home. Okay, so when we think about this as well, I'm going to share an example with you, right? Like, I was working with a woman and we were working on the physical abuse, the aggressiveness that she received from her father, right? So he would physically abuse her, hit her. She would kind of get like locked in the closet, stuff like that, right? So when we went back to her experience of when she experienced those moments, right? We started to ask her how it served her purpose when she was a kid. What's amazing is she could see that as a result of that, it actually gave her the relationship with her sister, right? And that brought her a tear of gratitude. And she became grateful for being able to be connected with her sister to such a great degree. Now, some of you guys who are listening, you might have resonated with that story and maybe saw another sibling that you connected with as a result of your trauma, your challenge, right? And some of you guys are like, that didn't hit. That's okay. This person's sister was so valuable to them and purposeful to them present day that it was worth going through that experience back then. Now, mind you, we got a lot of other details in there as well, but I kind of gave you the big chunk. The other cool thing to actually look at and witness is, and this is fun too, because when we dive in, it's getting really truthful and honest with yourself about like what actually happened in the past and what that looks like for you. This woman, we had a little bit fun with this too, because at a certain point, she started to say, well, some of how it served me was I started to learn like how my dad got mad and like why he got mad and all these different components. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, well, you learned that about, sounds like a couple times in. And I said, this happened for over a decade. And I was like, why'd you keep instigating him? And I asked the question, I was like, why'd you keep instigating him? If you knew that was the result, why'd you keep instigating him? And I remember the look on her face and she had this aha. And she's like, oh my God. She's like, you gave me my power back. She's like, because that was the moment I knew I could get my power back. And she burst into tears. And so part of it too is just being really transparent, is like, are we part of the co-creator of this situation? And if we are, often with traumatic people who've gone through perceived traumas, and I hear this, guys, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up. If there's part of you that, and not everyone has this, but some people do, but if part of you have actually gone through that, where you're like, wow, I actually instigated it for that long, and I'm part of the person that was a part of this challenge and problem, there are people who beat themselves up for lifetimes, lifetimes. Outside of having that, they have trauma on themselves for what they perceive they've done and how they created this. And you don't need to beat yourself up. You really don't. So it's kind of cool. Like when you dive in to the past, you get to kind of see how it served you during that time. And the main thing to pay attention to is what is important to you. It doesn't actually happen for everyone, but if you kind of listen to the story and you related to that in the sense where you're like, wow, I actually had a similar experience where I knew I could stop it from occurring, but I didn't. That it's also not part of this process of processing trauma, overcoming trauma, to sit there and beat yourself up for it. Because everyone on this planet who goes through something that intense and that painful on purpose and exit on, in a sense, brings it in and knows it's going to come, is also doing it for a reason. Part of the process of overcoming trauma is finding the deeper meaning and purpose behind it for you, for your actions, for their actions, for that experience overall. And when you have such a deep purpose around why it occurred, that also becomes part of your life purpose, in a sense that you actually, well, it's been part of your life purpose, but we see it basically. We see why we experienced it to such a degree that that's where the gratitude comes in. And when you have true gratitude over a traumatic experience, you'll experience like a tear of gratitude, a tear of inspiration when you see the perfection and the order of your life. And I know it sounds challenging to do. And like I said, I don't want you to sit there and be like, how am I going to do this? It is hard. It is hard. It's hard. It's a process. There's specificities. We go over it, my husband and I, in our workshops together. And there's a reason why we have those workshops, and the reason why it's not pre-recorded and that we do it one-on-one with you. Like, it's not easy, but it's 100% possible. And at the other side of it, it's just an event. It literally becomes just an event. And so when we think about trauma, we don't even put the label of trauma on it anymore. We say, this is an event that occurred. I actually know why it's purposeful to me. And you get to share that with people, which is also inspiring. You lead by example.
Yeah. The way I do it is like I kind of use accountability. I just like, instead of like I use it like accountability on my day-to-day life. So instead of making excuses, I acknowledge what happened. This is what happened, and how can I learn from what happened? Instead of like, oh, this happened because I did this and this and this and that. No, this is what happened. Now, how can I move forward from this experience, and what did I learn from the experience so that I can move forward and this does not happen again? So instead of just pushing blame on someone else or pushing blame on yourself or making excuses, we don't play to eliminate the blame game and just go straight into learning from the experience or exploring the experience and seeing what lessons came out of the experience and how you can apply those to your life moving forward. Me, I've been in domestic violence relationship. So when I like what you said, her friend, she knew those triggers. Now that I know those triggers and I know moving forward, if I go into another relationship, that if these triggers was to happen, like this is a sign that this person might become abusive. So those are things that have been warning sign. Like instead of me just sticking around waiting to see if that could happen, I'm more alert. Like, oh, maybe I should remove myself from the situation because I know where it can lead.
Yeah, and I love how you summarize that. Thank you, because it really is like, to be able to get through and get to the other side, it really is asking that question over and over again. What have you learned? What have you learned? What have you learned? To such a degree that, again, like you're grateful for it. You know how it's empowered you. And it's true. We could sit there and we could play that blame game, right? Like we could blame the other person and we could be a victim of the circumstances and we can be a victim to whatever that other person has done. But when we shift our perception to ask how we actually learned from it, how this empowered us, how it helped us to grow, and we do it to such a degree, you realize that person, you're not a victim of them. Mm-hmm. And when you realize you're no longer a victim of them and they don't have that level of control over you, because nobody can control your perceptions. Nobody can control your decisions or your actions. Those are yours and yours alone. And nobody can touch your soul. Nobody can touch your heart. And when you realize that they empower you in your life by going through this, all of a sudden, every single day, that removes that brain noise that makes you think about it, that makes you ruminate on it. And it also clears up this fog, right? Because our past perceived traumas, I don't know if you guys, when you have like the brain fog, right? And you're like, oh, I feel cloudy. Yeah. Yes, it's so normal. People feel cloudy all the time. Mm-hmm. Every cloud that we have is based on a judgment that's clouding our vision, clouding our objectivity. And it's cool because the more that we ask that question about the learning, not just in trauma, but in anything that we have a challenge with, then what winds up happening is that fog clears more and more, and you get more access to your objectivity, your authenticity, your unique vision and purpose. And that immediately helps you to move forward. So I love doing this kind of work. It's my favorite. Because I don't like to tell anyone how to live their life. Every person's unique. You're going to do your own thing. But I know that if I could shift your perceptions, then you'll take decisions and actions according to your purpose and your authenticity. And all my job is to shift your perceptions. You don't need my advice on what to do. You don't need my advice on how to live your life. You know that. You got your own way of doing it. It's very unique. I'm just in charge of helping you shift the perceptions that are blocking you from seeing that unique vision within yourself.
I totally agree. I say that to people all the time. Like stop looking external for the answers. You already possess them. The external is just here for support. Everything you already know. You know where you want to go. You know what you need. You know it all. Now, how you're going to get there, you might need support there. You know what I'm saying? So don't look for other people to answer those questions that you have to answer. And that's when a lot of people get their journey crossed, or they end up going down the wrong path because they're externally like, oh, this person experienced the same thing that I experienced, so I can follow the same path that they did. not knowing, like, yes, they might had a domestic violence relationship, but their domestic relationship is not identical to the one that you experienced. So you need your own path to heal and go through your process the way that benefits you, because the way that person benefit might not match what you need. So a lot of people understanding that we already have what we need inside of ourselves. So external, when we look outward, it's only for support.
I love that you shared that. And yeah, I totally agree. And it's amazing because you're right. Like sometimes we'll look at someone on the outside and we'll say, they did it, so I'm going to map it out and do it exactly the same. And then you get slammed because it doesn't work. Yeah, you get so slammed. And you're like, why isn't it working for me? It works for all these other people. Because you are a unique individual with a unique purpose on a unique path with unique experiences. And part of it is utilizing the tools that you have out there to help you to tap into what that is inside of you. So there's no one tool that's ever going to work for everyone. There's no one thing. There's many things that work for us and we use them, but also having the wisdom to not compare ourselves to others so that you also incorporate it into your life in your own unique way.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Is it anything else that you would like to share with them about like mindset that can really help them like move forward in their journey today?
Yes. So when it comes to mindset, there's a couple components that I'd love to share. Is one, don't ever stop clarifying your vision. Don't ever stop clarifying your purpose. Don't ever stop clarifying your mission. Sometimes we think we've nailed it, but the truth is it's ever evolving as you are. And we only get bits and pieces of it at a time. So when we lose sight of that vision, we lose sight of ourselves. We start focusing on things that aren't important to us, which actually leads to failure. Because if you're trying to inject someone else's life, if you're trying to live that other person's life, do what they do, guess what's going to happen? You're going to fail because you're not meant to do that. So keep focusing on refining, understanding, and getting clear on that so that you're actually setting yourself up for success in a sense. Because if you do something that has a big enough why, you're going to focus on it on a regular basis. And that alone will help your mindset tremendously. Yeah. The other component is,
like, don't over assess on it either. Like what I used to do like, this is it. And then I get fixated on it. And then I forget about everything else. Like, don't over fixate, acknowledge that it's there, stay on the path of it, but don't let it be your only be all see all. You know what I'm saying? Like we see one part of it and just like think that's be all see all, and we're fixated on it and we don't move forward, move beyond it. And like, oh, this is my vision, this is what it has to be, this is what it has to be. And like you said, it's ever evolving. So we only see this and think that's it, and that's it, and we get fixated. And like when that part comes, like, and we get lost, because if we do accomplish that one part of it, we think that we have made it and not understand that it's more to it to go forward. So keep moving forward. Don't fixate it. And it's like she said, it's everly evolving. It's evolving. Just remember that. So, and it might change day to day based on your journey and based on how fast you're healing. You might evolve in the process that you might not be the same person in the next month or the next year. So don't think that, oh my God, I'm thinking something totally different than I was yesterday. And what I'm going to do next, what I'm going to do now. Trust yourself, ask yourself what's next. Just talk to yourself and you will answer your own questions.
Yeah, that's beautiful addition. I really love that you added those components because you're right. It's not static. It's moving with us all the time. And I love how you shared too, is like from one day to the next, it can seem different, and it can. And that's because you're right. We don't focus. We can get latched on to this is it and it's the one thing. But the truth is it isn't one thing. We're multifaceted human beings. There are multiple things in our life that inspire us. And it's not just about focusing on the one. It's figuring out how to incorporate all of them. And one day, you're right, one thing's more important than the next. So you love yourself for that. Yeah,
exactly. And don't forget about the backpedals. Like we might backpedal and we might feel like we lost the vision because we backpedal. But a backpedal is, again, it's a learning experience. And we just ask, what have I learned from this backpedal so that I can move towards the vision that I want?
Yes. And this is beautiful because this kind of goes into the other mindset component I wanted to talk about. So thank you. Yeah, because if you ask that question to such a degree and understand what you learned and why it was purposeful in your life, all of a sudden you can't even label it as a backpedal. You're like, that was meant to be. I was meant to go through that challenge. And the trick with this too is that there are certain it's easy for us to pay attention to the challenges to shift our mindset and kind of ask how it serves us and see the positive spin. However, what we don't usually catch on to is our prides. And our prides is when we already have an overly positive spin on something. When we have an overly positive spin and basically we think we're the shit or what we're doing is the shit and it's amazing and we're all puffed up. That's an over positively spin. And that's also not our authentic self, because our authentic self is humble enough to see that, yes, I do this, but it doesn't make me better than you. So when we get on that overly positive spin, we actually add some drawbacks, some disservices. We start to see some of the downsides to it until we can bring it into neutrality, into balance. And when we're in a balanced state on the outside, we're also on a balanced state on the inside. And then we don't have to strive to be something that we're not. When we get rid of that pride, we stop striving to be something that we're not, and we give ourselves permission to be who we are. So it's not just tackling all the challenges, but also the pride, which we sometimes want to hold on to a little bit more, but it does cause more damage than you think.
It really does.
It does.
Well, is there anything you would like to, any advice or any quote that you would like to give the listeners before we end this episode?
Yeah. So whatever you're doing in your life with yourself, there's really only one person who's going to make your life happen. You can listen to all this stuff. You can feel motivated for a moment, but if you don't actually put the time and energy into the internal self, then nobody else is going to be able to do it for you. You can go out and you can hire mentors, you can hire guides, and trust me, I believe in them 100%. But in between every session, it's up to you to put it into action. So remember that and know that you're worth it. You're definitely worth it. Every person on this planet, as I said, has a unique purpose, a unique set of values, something that they're destined to be and do on this life. And what a gift to actually give yourself the opportunity and go through the challenge to feel it, experience it, and live it.
That is so awesome. I want to add one thing. I seen a quote that said, "We're not in control of the first thought, but we are in control of the second." So when you do have that first thought come to your mind, you have the power to control the second thought that comes behind it. It's your choice to believe it, or it's your choice to challenge it. So definitely take that into consideration. Well, can you tell the listeners where they can reach you and the special gift that you have for them?
Yes. So they can reach me on my website, which is carlypepin.com. And they can email me at carly@carlypepin.com. And I can send them a link to a recording that I have on increasing your self-confidence and self-worth. And just mention Rose so that I know where you came from. And I'll be sure to send that to you. It's about an hour and a half long.
All right, guys. Thank y'all guys for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next week. Have a beautiful day. Well, that's it for today's episode of A Sisters Love Podcast. But before we end, I want to invite you to our new support group. This group is exclusively for podcast listeners. This is the perfect place for women to come together, share experiences, ask questions, and get access to exclusive resources. You'll also get to meet some of our amazing guests in this group. And also, this is a judge-free zone. You don't have to worry about feeling unheard or alone. To join this group, all you have to do is sign up for our mailing list. And once you do that, you'll get granted access to the support group. You'll find the link below. So that's it for today's episode, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.